the Indians all lived around Gunflint and Sag, and so they gave him this part of the country to trap. So he trapped over here, more east, and he knew that the border from Canada and the United States was through those middle lakes, and so he was always conscious of that. When he made a portage, he'd try to make sure that he was right in the middle, so the portage wasn't on the United States side or the Canadian side. And so he made he got a lot of furs too, made a lot of money, and so he found out he could homestead a place on Moon Lake. It's about 5 lakes back of Poplar Lake. And so he homesteaded there and he built a cabin. And in 1913, he went back and my mom married him and came with. And I often wondered if he told her she'd have to walk 30 miles to this cabin. But she evidently didn't turn back. But anyway, so that was the beginning of their married life. And then he told my mom that he had found Clearwater Lake, and it was the prettiest lake up here. Cold, deep, clear, beautiful bluffs down the lake. And he was saving his money to buy land there, and that's where they were going to live. And so he wanted to go and show her that lake the day after they got to this cabin. And my mom thought she should be making bread. And so she said, well, I have to make bread. And he said, well, that's all right. Just bring it with, and we'll let it raise in the bottom of the canoe. And then when it's ready to bake, we'll just go ashore and bake it. Well, my mom's spending the whole day wondering how he's going to bake this bread just by going ashore, you know. And so now there's 7 lakes from Clearwater. Just imagine that. And so they paddle these lakes, and he carries the canoe across, and I suppose my mom's carrying the bread. And they finally get here. I'm not sure where the bread was ready to raise, but anyway, when the bread was ready to raise, my mother said, Charlie, the bread's ready to bake. And she said, he just went to shore. Didn't pick a certain spot out. She thought he had a spot somewhere to bake this bread, you know. And so then they get to shore, and now he's digging a trench and telling her, you got to be downwind so the wind blows the heat up to bake the bread. And then you can't use this kind of wood because that burns too fast. It'll burn up the bread. And this other wood has a slow burning, and that'll produce the heat to bake the bread. And so she said she understood all that, but she could not understand how he was going to bake this bread. And so then she said, after he got this all ready, the fire going, he goes to his pack and he takes out this contraption. And it was a reflector oven that the Indians used. And he set that out and put the bread in there and baked the bread. My mom could not believe it. She said she just looked at that and thought, now how on earth is that going to work? But she said it baked fine. So she had an education. Anyway, they seen Clearwater, and my dad, those 2 years he was up here, when people came to Grand Marais and wanted to come up fishing up in this beautiful country or hunting, there was nobody in Grand Marais to take them. And they'd say, there's a white man that went to live with the Indians. He knows the lakes and, as well as the Indians, and you just walk up the trail a little ways. The first Indian you see, tell him you want to see Charlie Boostrom. And then wait right there, and Charlie will come. So that's how my dad started the resort business. People came, and he must have gave him his address and told him to write to him when they were planning to come, and he would take them hunting and fishing. And so that's how he started. Well, there was a man who had a fishing camp on Clearwater, and he had a cabin down on the second point. And my dad would take him fishing. And the first notice of my dad in the Grammary paper was in 1914. It said that this Mr. Simmons from Iowa had been at his fishing camp on Clearwater, and he had gotten all these different fish on this lake and that lake, and he said that at the very end it said Charlie Boostrom was his guide. And so my dad must have been keeping an eye on him. And so when he wanted to sell the land, my dad bought it. And my dad didn't want to be on the second point, he wanted to be down on the end. So he built a cabin about 10 feet from the door of this lodge. He built a little cabin there and they lived there. And he moved here in 1915. So that was the beginning of the lodge.